Up until now, we've been working with positive and negative numbers. So we've worked out rules like this, where you've got a 2 and you're adding a -3. And when you've got a plus and a minus together, you can change that to 2 take away 3, which on the number line would take you down to -1. But a dilemma arises when we start to multiply or divide. For example, if we've got -3 times 2, what does that actually give us? And also, if we've got something like -2 times -3, what does that give us? One of the ways that we can work this out is by looking at patterns. Now, if I look at this grid, you can see we're timesing these numbers by these numbers. Let's start by working with things that we know. For example, we know all the positives here. 1 times 1 gives us 1. 2 times 1 gives us 2. And 3 times 1 gives us 3. Now, if I keep working on this, I'll get the following patterns. 1 times 2 is 2, and I'll quickly go and finish these off. 3 times 2 is 6. We'll go back here. 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 3 is 6. And 3 times 3 is 9. Now, if we're clever, we can actually work out some patterns here. If I count back 3, 2, 1, 0, and I go this way, this one would be -1, -2, and then -3. Likewise, 6, 4, 2 would give me -2, -4, -6. We're just using our number lines as a pattern. 9, 6, 3, that would be 3, 6, 9, but they'd all be going to the left side of the number line because we're going down and these go down. Now, what I'd like you to do is to use the same patterns and finish off this grid. I'm going to do this very quickly, so if you want to pause and finish yours, when you're ready, you can watch this video again. Now, once you've got this grid completed, you can start to see some patterns. We know already that these are positive numbers and these are positive numbers. So if I take these positives and I multiply them with these positives, I get into this section here. So I can say that a positive number multiplied by a positive number will actually give me a positive number. If, however, I take my positive number and I multiply it with a negative number, positive times a negative, I get this group of numbers here. A positive times a negative, a positive times a negative number. You'll notice they're all negative numbers. So there's a rule. Let's try this one here. There's all negative numbers. What happens when I multiply negative numbers with negative numbers? You'll notice that they are all positive. So a negative number times a negative number will always give me a positive number. Let me just rub this little bit out here. Go back to here. There we go. Now, finally, what have we missed out on? We've got a negative times a positive. All right, let's go and have a look at this now. Here's my negative numbers. Here's my positive. So a negative times a positive, and you'll notice they're all negatives. You'll notice a pattern occurring here. Let me just change the color. You'll find when the numbers are both positive and you multiply them, you get a positive. And when they're both negative numbers and you multiply them, you get a positive. When the numbers are different signs, positive times negative, you get a negative, or a negative times a positive, you get a negative. So the rule turns out, once again, I'm not sure where this came from. Let's get rid of that and replace it with the negative. There we go. So I'll tick that off again. A minus times a positive is a minus. So the rules work out that if you've got two positive numbers multiplied together or two negative numbers together, the answer is going to be positive. Likewise, a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive, the answer is going to be negative. This works in very nicely with the rules of Brahmagupta. He said, these are his last rules, that when you have a product or a quotient, in other words, when you divide as well, two fortunes, that's a positive times a positive, you end up with a fortune, one fortune. When you have two debts, that's two negatives multiplied together, you end up with a fortune, a positive, which is what we said. If we have a debt, that's a negative, times a fortune, that's a positive, we end up with a debt, a negative. So a negative times a positive is a negative. And likewise, if I have a fortune and I multiply it by a debt, I end up with a debt. So our rules were, when the signs are the same, we end up with a positive. When the signs are different, this is when we're multiplying, we end up with a minus. Let's have a look at two examples. Here we have a positive times a negative. Now, according to our rule, a positive times a negative will give us a negative answer. So we'll put a negative here, and 5 times 6 is 30. In this question, we've got a minus times a minus, and we know a minus times a minus, according to our pattern, will give us a positive or a fortune. So the answer is going to be plus, and we'll write it down even though we don't need to, and 3 sevens are 21. Now, it does work with division. We'll talk about this next time, but just for now, let's do it. A minus divided by a minus. Now, the rule was 2 minuses, a division should be a positive. So we're going to call this a positive, and 4 into 36 goes 9 times. We don't need to write that positive there because we know it's a positive 9. It's just a 9. And here we've got a minus, and it's divided by a positive. And a minus and a positive divided or multiply will give us a minus. So answer is minus, and 9 into 18 goes 2.